Welcome to Deduction Junction, where mysteries unfold and every detail holds a clue. Step into the brilliant mind of Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, as we journey through his most intriguing cases. With logic sharper than a razor and an eye for the smallest detail, Poirot unravels crimes that leave others baffled. Get ready to immerse yourself in a world of suspense, deception, and of course, the little gray cells. The investigation begins now. Chapter 1. The shadow of the dagger. It was a crisp autumn evening in London, the air carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant chimney smoke. Inside his well-ordered flat on Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in his high-backed chair, his small yet perfectly polished shoes gleaming in the lamplight. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the bookshelves, and on the mahogany table before him sat a neatly arranged plate of delicate pastries, each placed with mathematical precision. Opposite him, Captain Arthur Hastings lounged with a newspaper in hand, occasionally glancing up to observe his friend. "You know, Poirot," he remarked, folding the paper, "life has been rather uneventful lately. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, but I dare say we could do with a bit of excitement." Poirot arched a fastidious eyebrow. "Mon cher Hastings, you, English and your ceaseless thirst for excitement. I, on the other hand, find great pleasure in order and tranquility. A well-symmetrized evening, what more could one ask?" Before Hastings could reply, the telephone rang, its sharp trill disrupting the peaceful atmosphere. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings before rising with deliberate precision to answer. "Hello?" His voice was crisp, measured. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, breathless, trembling, cut through the stillness. "Monsieur Poirot, you must help me. Please, I am in terrible danger." Poirot straightened. His sharp mind, ever attuned to the nuances of human emotion, caught the unmistakable edge of fear in her tone. "Mademoiselle, who is speaking?" "My name is Evelyn Harcourt. I cannot say much over the telephone. I am at Halewood House, and I fear I am being watched." "I need you. Tonight." Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. What danger threatens you?" There was a brief hesitation, then, in a whisper, "It's the Obsidian Dagger." Poirot's fingers tightened around the receiver. "The Obsidian Dagger?" Yes. I know it sounds strange, but oh." A sharp gasp followed, then a muffled rustling. "Someone's coming, I must—" The line went dead. Poirot remained still for a moment, the silence humming with meaning. Then he carefully replaced the receiver and turned to Hastings, who had set his newspaper aside, his curiosity thoroughly piqued. "Well?" Hastings asked impatiently. "What was that all about?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Mon ami, we have been summoned to a place of intrigue and danger. A young woman in distress, a dagger of obsidian, and a voice filled with terror. It is most curious, non?" "A dagger?" Hastings frowned. What could she mean by that? That is what we must discover. But let us not delay. Fetch your coat, Hastings. We are to visit Halewood House this very night. Halewood House lay on the outskirts of Surrey, nestled amidst rolling hills and ancient oaks. The drive from London was a long one, the countryside wrapped in a thickening fog that curled around, the trees like ghostly fingers. As their hired car wound its way along the narrow roads, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading towards something ominous. "You know, Poirot," he mused, peering out at the mist-laden fields, "this all has the makings of a proper ghost story. A desperate phone call in the night, a mysterious dagger, a lonely house in the countryside. It's enough to send a shiver down one's spine." Poirot, snug in his immaculate overcoat, merely gave a slight shrug. "The mind of a detective must not indulge in such superstitions, mon ami. Let us deal in facts." Hastings smiled but said nothing more. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they arrived at Halewood House. The estate loomed before them, a grand yet somehow forbidding structure, its ivy-covered stone walls and Gothic turrets lending it an air of faded glory. The windows were dark, save for one faintly glowing light on the upper floor. The driver set down their bags, tipped his hat, and drove off into the night, leaving them standing before the wrought-iron gates. The chill in the air deepened. Not the most inviting of places, Hastings muttered. Poirot adjusted his hat. Come, Hastings, we must not keep Mademoiselle Harcourt waiting. The great oak doors of Halewood House bore an iron knocker in the shape of a lion's head. Hastings reached for it, rapping sharply. The sound echoed through the halls within. For a moment, nothing. Then, the faint click of a lock being turned. The door swung open, revealing a solemn-faced butler, a man of advanced years with sunken cheeks and piercing eyes. Yes? His voice was emotionless. Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings, Poirot announced, producing his card. We are expected. The butler's gaze flicked to the card, then to Poirot himself. For the briefest moment there was a hesitation, almost as if he was about to object, before he stepped aside. Come in. They entered a dimly lit entrance hall lined with portraits. A grand staircase wound its way upward, its polished banister gleaming in the flickering candlelight. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something else, something metallic. Poirot glanced around. Mademoiselle Harcourt. She is waiting for us. The butler's lips pressed into a thin line. Miss Harcourt? Yes, Hastings said. She telephoned us, said she needed our help. The butler's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes, an unease, carefully masked. I am afraid that is not possible, sir. Poirot's brows lifted. Not possible, and why is that, may I ask? The butler hesitated before saying, Because Miss Harcourt is dead, sir. She was found this very evening, murdered. There was a heavy silence. Hastings let out a shocked exclamation. Good heavens! Murdered! The butler inclined his head. Yes, sir. The police have been informed. Poirot's sharp gaze did not waver. And tell me, mon ami, how was she killed? The butler's voice was grave as he answered. She was stabbed, sir. Stabbed through the heart, with a black obsidian dagger. Hastings inhaled sharply. Poirot, however, merely closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, as if absorbing the information. Then he nodded. Take us to her, he said quietly. And with that, they stepped deeper into the shadows of Halewood House, where death had already come to call. Chapter 2. The Mark of the Dagger. The butler led Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings through the dimly lit corridors of Halewood House, his polished shoes clicking against the stone floor. The house bore the weight of history. Portraits of solemn ancestors stared down at them, their painted eyes seeming to follow every step. The air was heavy with something unspoken, as though the walls themselves were reluctant to reveal their secrets. Hastings, still shaken by the revelation, leaned toward Poirot and whispered, A woman calls us in distress, claims she is in danger, and when we arrive, she's already dead. It's damnably unsettling. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly as he clasped his hands behind his back. Oui, mon ami. It is a most disturbing turn of events. And yet does it not strike you as peculiar? Hastings frowned. What do you mean? Poirot lowered his voice. The timing, Hastings. Mademoiselle Harcourt called us not an hour ago claiming she was in danger, and now she is dead, killed in precisely the manner she feared. Hastings swallowed. You think she was killed because she called us? Poirot did not answer at once. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the flickering candlelight as though seeing things others could not. Perhaps, he murmured. Or perhaps it is even more curious than that. Before Hastings could ask him to explain, the butler came to a halt before a large wooden door. He turned, his expression unreadable. "The body was discovered an hour ago by one of the maids. The authorities have been informed, but the master of the house insisted you be allowed to examine the scene." "First." Poirot gave a small nod. "The master of the house. He is expecting us?" "Yes, sir. Lord Henry Hailwood will join you shortly." The butler pushed open the door. A faint creak echoed through the hall. The room beyond was a study, large and richly furnished, with bookshelves lining the walls and a grand mahogany desk standing in the center. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting long, eerie shadows. But it was not the opulence of the room that drew their attention. It was the still figure sprawled upon the Persian rug. Evelyn Harcourt lay motionless, her body twisted unnaturally, as though she had collapsed mid-struggle. She wore an emerald-green dress that shimmered even in the dim light, but it was marred by a dark stain, blood spreading outward from a single wound in her chest. And there, protruding from her heart, was a dagger. It was unlike any ordinary blade. The hilt was inlaid with gold, but the blade itself was black, pure obsidian, gleaming like a shard of night. The contrast between the weapon's beauty and its gruesome purpose sent a chill through Hastings. Poirot moved forward, his steps careful, deliberate. He knelt beside the body, his eyes tracing every detail. Hastings swallowed hard. "Stabbed straight through the heart," he murmured. "It must have been instantaneous." Poirot reached out, his fingertips hovering just above the hilt of the dagger. He did not touch it, but examined it with a fascination that Hastings had come to recognize. "Fascinating," Poirot murmured. Hastings grimaced. "I don't see what's so fascinating about murder." Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. "Murder, mon ami, is always tragic. But it is the details that interest me, the things that do not quite fit." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot gestured to the dagger. "Observe, Hastings. This is not a weapon one simply happens upon. It is rare, ceremonial. And yet, it has been used in the most crude and direct manner." Hastings considered this. "You think the dagger has some significance?" Poirot nodded. "I do. And more than that, Hastings, I think the person who used it meant to send a message." Before Hastings could press further, footsteps echoed from the hall. A moment later, the door swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man strode into the room. His hair was graying at the temples, his face lined with age and worry. He was dressed in a dark suit, his posture rigid. "Lord Henry Hailwood?" Poirot asked, rising smoothly to his feet. The man's gaze flicked between them. "Yes. And you are the detective?" "Hercule Poirot at your service." Poirot inclined his head. "This is my associate, Captain Hastings." Lord Hailwood barely acknowledged Hastings, his eyes instead moving to the lifeless form of Evelyn Harcourt. His face did not change, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. Poirot studied him. "You knew the young woman well, monsieur?" Lord Hailwood exhaled sharply. "She was my ward. I took her in after her father, an old friend, passed away. She was like a daughter to me." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, monsieur, I perceive you are not overcome with grief." Lord Hailwood's jaw tightened. "I am not a man given to displays of emotion, Monsieur Poirot. That does not mean I do not feel them." Poirot's eyes remained on him for a moment before he said, "Tell me, monsieur, do you know of the Obsidian Dagger? A flicker of something. Was it recognition? Crossed?" Lord Hailwood's face before he masked it. "I've heard of it." Poirot arched a brow. "Indeed? And how did you hear of it?" Lord Hailwood hesitated, then sighed. "Because it is part of my family's history. The dagger belonged to one of my ancestors, Sir Reginald Hailwood. It is said to have been a relic from an expedition to South America centuries ago." "An heirloom, then?" Poirot pressed. "Yes," Lord Hailwood admitted. though I haven't seen it in years. It was kept in a locked display case. Poirot glanced at Hastings, then back at Lord Hailwood. And yet, monsieur, here it is, plunged into the heart of Mademoiselle Harcourt. Silence filled the room. Lord Hailwood's expression darkened. Then that means it was stolen. And whoever stole it, his voice was low, dangerous, is also the murderer. Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. Perhaps. He turned back to the dagger, his sharp gaze narrowing. Or perhaps, monsieur, this is but the first act of a much larger game. Hastings felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something ominous in Poirot's words, something that suggested they were only beginning to unravel a mystery far more dangerous than they had anticipated. And the true killer? They were still in the shadows, waiting. Chapter 3. Secrets in the dark. The silence that followed Lord Hailwood's declaration was thick, a tangible thing that pressed upon the walls of the study. The only sound was the steady crackling of the dying fire, casting long, flickering shadows across the crime scene. Poirot stood still, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes keen and watchful. Hastings, standing beside him, resisted the urge to clear his throat. The air was heavy with tension, and he had long since learned that Poirot preferred to let silence do its work. Lord Hailwood's expression remained composed, though something in his eyes betrayed an underlying agitation. The dagger was stolen, he repeated, his voice measured. That much is obvious. The display case in which it was kept was locked, has been for years. If it is here now, in Evelyn's chest, then someone took it. Poirot stepped forward. When was the last time you saw the dagger, monsieur? Lord Hailwood hesitated. He exhaled sharply. It has been years. I have not had much cause to inspect it. It was a curiosity, nothing more. A relic from an old world. Poirot tilted his head slightly. And yet, monsieur, relics have a habit of drawing the attention of those who covet them. You are quite certain that no one else in the household had access to it? Lord Hailwood's jaw tightened. The case was in the library, locked. If it has been disturbed, someone must have broken into it. Hastings frowned. But who? A locked case suggests someone with knowledge of the house, someone who had the means to get to it without raising suspicion. Lord Hailwood's lips pressed into a thin line. Then that means someone in this house is responsible. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone wishes you to think so. Lord Hailwood's gaze darkened. If you have a theory, Monsieur Poirot, I suggest you share it. Poirot merely smiled, turning his attention back to the body. He crouched once more, his fingers hovering just above Evelyn's wrist. She has been dead for at least an hour, perhaps more. Rigor mortis has not yet fully set in, which means the crime was committed not long after she telephoned me. Hastings inhaled sharply. Then she knew the killer. She let them in. Poirot nodded. It is likely. And yet, there are still things that trouble me. Lord Hailwood folded his arms. Such as? Poirot tapped his temple. A woman in fear of her life. She calls for help. And then, within the hour, she is dead. He straightened. Does that not strike you as efficient, monsieur? The moment she gives voice to her fear, she is silenced. Hastings felt a chill creep up his spine. You think she was killed because she called you? Poirot turned to him. It is a possibility we must consider. If she was a threat to someone, if she had learned something dangerous, then her reaching out to me may have forced their hand. Lord Hailwood's face was unreadable. Then the question is, what did she know? Before Poirot could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. The butler reappeared, his expression grave. Inspector Morton has arrived. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah. Then let us see what the good inspector makes of this most curious affair. Inspector Morton was a broad, no-nonsense man with a thick mustache and a perpetually furrowed brow. He stepped into the study, taking in the scene with a practiced eye before letting out a heavy sigh. "Another one, then." Hastings blinked. "Another one?" Morton turned to them, nodding grimly. "You're not the only ones dealing with strange deaths, gentlemen. There was another incident only a week ago, a man found dead in similar circumstances, stabbed, though not with this peculiar knife." He gestured toward the obsidian dagger still lodged in Evelyn's chest. Poirot's interest sharpened. "Another stabbing, you say?" Morton nodded. "A banker in London, no known enemies, no reason for his death, but he was killed in his own home. Doors locked, nothing stolen. It was an execution, plain and simple." Hastings felt a cold prickle of unease. "You think the two are connected?" Morton exhaled. "I don't believe in coincidences, Captain. And if there is a link, I mean to find it." He turned to Poirot. "I suppose you'll be assisting in this investigation?" Poirot smiled slightly. "But of course, Inspector. The matter intrigues me greatly." Morton snorted. "I thought it might." He looked back at the body. "Well, I'll have my men search the house. In the meantime, I'd suggest you start talking to the household. If someone took that dagger, they're either very bold or very desperate." Poirot inclined his head. "An excellent suggestion, Inspector. Come, Hastings. Let us see what secrets the inhabitants of Halewood House have to offer." The drawing room was large and stately, its high ceilings and dark wooden paneling giving it a somber air. The occupants, however, seemed anything but calm. Poirot and Hastings entered to find a small group of people already waiting, each one a potential suspect in the growing mystery. Lady Margaret Halewood, Lord Halewood's wife, sat stiff-backed in an armchair, her fingers twisting a silk handkerchief. Her dark eyes were watchful, darting from face to face. Beside her, Julian Halewood, their son, lounged in a corner, his expression unreadable. He was a tall, lean man in his early 30s, with sharp features and a carefully maintained air of nonchalance. Then there was Miss Charlotte Graves, a young woman in her 20s, who sat apart from the others. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And finally, there was Edward Harcourt, Evelyn's older brother. He stood near the window, his jaw set, his shoulders tense. His grief was plain, but beneath it, something else lurked. Anger, perhaps, or fear. Poirot let his gaze settle on each one in turn before stepping forward. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I intend to find the truth." A silence followed his words, thick and uneasy. Then, Lady Halewood spoke. Her voice was low, almost wary. "And what exactly do you expect to find, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That, madame, is the question, is it not?" He looked over the assembled group, his keen eyes taking in every flicker of movement, every unspoken tension. There were secrets here, secrets that someone would kill to protect, and Poirot, with his little grey cells, would see them all. Chapter 4. Shadows of the past. The tension in the drawing room was palpable. The assembled members of the Halewood household sat in various states of unease, their expressions ranging from composed wariness to open anxiety. Poirot, ever the keen observer, stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, surveying the room with quiet intensity. Hastings sat beside him, notebook in hand, though he had yet to write anything. It was always best to let Poirot take the lead. Lord Halewood, having positioned himself near the liquor cabinet, poured himself a brandy with deliberate precision. His gaze remained fixed on Poirot as though weighing his next words carefully. "Monsieur Poirot, I assume you have questions for us all." Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, Lord Halewood. You see, murder, it is not an act that happens in isolation. There are reasons, motives, histories, and when one begins to examine them closely, the truth, it begins to take shape. Julian Halewood, the heir to the family name, let out a soft chuckle from where he lounged in a chair by the window. That sounds rather poetic, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm afraid I fail to see how any of us could have had reason to harm Miss Evelyn Harcourt. She was a guest in our home, was she not? Poirot studied him, his sharp eyes assessing. You speak with the detachment of a man who wishes not to be involved, Monsieur Halewood. And yet it is curious, n'est-ce pas? A woman comes here, frightened, desperate. She places a call for help. And then before that help can arrive, she is dead. Lady Margaret Halewood shifted uncomfortably. Do you mean to suggest that someone in this house, someone among us, was responsible? Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. Would you have me believe otherwise, madam? A heavy silence settled over the room. Poirot let it linger before continuing. You see, I do not concern myself only with what is obvious. The locked doors, the stolen dagger, these are but distractions. The real question, mes amis, is why Miss Harcourt was killed, and I believe that answer lies in her past. Edward Harcourt, standing near the window, his hands clenched into fists, finally spoke. Evelyn had no enemies. His voice was tight, with grief, but beneath it, something else simmered. Anger, perhaps, or even fear. She had no reason to be involved in anything dangerous. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. And yet she was afraid. Did she confide in you, Monsieur Harcourt? Did she tell you why she feared for her life? Edward hesitated, his jaw tightening. No. She said very little, only that she had seen something she was not meant to see. A murmur passed through the room. Hastings leaned forward. Seen something? What do you mean? Edward shook his head. I don't know. She wouldn't say. She only told me that she had to get away for a while, that staying in London was too dangerous. She thought someone was watching her. Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings could sense his interest deepen. And did she say who precisely was watching her? Edward hesitated, then exhaled. No. Lady Halewood let out a soft gasp. Then this could mean that someone followed her here. Poirot turned his gaze to her. Perhaps, madame. Or perhaps her killer was already here, waiting. Julian Halewood scoffed. You make it sound so sinister. Monsieur Poirot, do you truly believe one of us would be capable of something so brutal? Poirot gave a small smile. You would be surprised, monsieur, at what people are capable of when they are desperate. A knock at the door interrupted them. The butler stepped inside, his face carefully neutral. Inspector Morton wishes to see you, sir. Poirot nodded. Ah, then let us not keep him waiting. The inspector entered, his manner brisk, his eyes sharp as he took in the gathered household. He gave Poirot a curt nod before addressing the room. I have spoken with my men. We have examined the grounds, the study, and the surrounding area. He glanced toward Lord Halewood. Nothing was disturbed, no signs of forced entry. If the killer came from outside, they were very careful. Poirot clasped his hands together. Then we must consider another possibility, Inspector, that the killer did not come from outside at all. Morton sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He crossed his arms. But I've something else to report, something that might be of interest. My men spoke to a few of the staff members. One of them claims to have seen something peculiar last night, just before Miss Harcourt's death. Hastings straightened. What did they see? Morton's gaze swept over the room, watching for reactions. A figure, moving through the house, past the study door. A shadow, they said. It was late, near midnight. The figure moved quickly, as though in a hurry. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Did this staff member recognize the figure? Morton shook his head. No, they only caught a glimpse. Hastings frowned. But that means the killer was inside the house. Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. Oui, mon ami. And that means we are looking at someone who not only had access to the study, but who knew exactly where to find the dagger. A heavy silence followed. Poirot turned to face the room once more, his gaze lingering on each occupant. The truth, mes amis, is a delicate thing, but it does not remain hidden forever. There were secrets in this house, and Hercule Poirot would uncover them all. Chapter 5. The Missing Puzzle Piece. A storm had settled over Halewood Manor, the wind howling against the windows as rain lashed the stone walls. Inside, the atmosphere was just as turbulent. The revelation from Inspector Morton that a figure had been seen moving past the study before Miss Harcourt's murder had sent ripples of unease through the household. The suspects, once outwardly composed, now displayed subtle cracks in their facades. Poirot, ever the keen observer, noted each reaction with silent interest. Lady Halewood clutched the pearl necklace at her throat, her fingers pressing against the cool beads in a nervous rhythm. Julian Halewood stood stiffly, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. Edward Harcourt, grieving and restless, paced near the fireplace, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Someone was in the study last night," Poirot said at last, breaking the silence. "Someone who had reason to enter unseen, who moved with purpose." He paused, letting his words settle. "Tell me, mes amis, who among you left their rooms after midnight?" No one answered at first. The only sound was the crackling fire, the storm beyond the walls, and the faint ticking of the grand clock in the hall. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, silence. It is always most revealing. Julian let out a sharp breath. "I don't appreciate this, Monsieur Poirot. Are you suggesting that we're all liars?" Poirot smiled gently. "Non, mon ami. I suggest nothing. I only observe. And I observe that not one of you has answered my question." Lady Halewood swallowed hard. I did not leave my room." Julian crossed his arms. Neither did. Edward Harcourt hesitated before shaking his head. "I couldn't sleep, but I stayed in my room." Poirot turned to Lord Halewood, who had remained silent. The older man exhaled through his nose. "I left my room for a drink. I often do." "Ah," Poirot nodded. "And did you see anyone, Monseigneur?" Lord Halewood glanced at his son. "Julian had already gone to bed. Margaret as well. I saw no one." Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, then shifted. "What of the staff? Was anyone awake?" Lady Halewood wrung her hands. "Perhaps the butler, or one of the maids. They tend to stay up later." Poirot turned to Inspector Morton. "Could we question them again, mon cher Inspector? They may remember something more." Morton gave a curt nod. "I'll see to it." He left the room, his heavy boots echoing against the polished floor. Poirot sighed, looking toward the study. Door, now sealed off by the police. The obsidian dagger had been found in Miss Harcourt's chest, but its original display case had been shattered. That suggested a struggle, or a hurried theft. But why take a weapon from a display case when... "Any knife would do?" He turned back to the others. "This dagger, tell me, does it hold any particular significance?" Julian smirked. "Other than being a family heirloom, it's been here for generations. My great-grandfather acquired it on his travels. But as for any significance, I can't say." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet, someone believed it was worth killing for." Lady Halewood flinched. "Do you think Evelyn was killed because of the dagger? Or," Julian countered, "did the killer simply use what was available?" Poirot's lips pursed in thought. "Perhaps, but there is something troubling me. A young woman, terrified for her life, calls for help. She is killed before that help can arrive. The weapon? A rare and valuable dagger, one that should not have been accessible so easily. And now we learn that someone was seen in the halls, moving in the shadows. Edward Harcourt rubbed his temples. "What are you getting at, Poirot?" Poirot's voice was soft but deliberate. "That there is a missing puzzle piece, and until we find it, the picture remains incomplete." A commotion sounded from the hall. The butler, Mr. Davies, entered, his normally stoic face pale. "Inspector Morton asks you to come at once, sir. There's been a discovery." Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance before following him out. The rest of the household trailed behind, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They reached the study, where Inspector Morton stood beside the desk, a grim look on his face. On the desk lay an opened letter, the ink slightly smudged but still legible. Poirot stepped forward and read aloud. "Dearest Edward, I cannot explain in a letter, but I am in great danger. I have seen something I was not meant to see, and now I fear for my life. There is no one I can trust. Must leave London at once. I will come to Halewood Manor. It is the only place I can think of where I may be safe. But if anything should happen to me, know this. The answer lies in the dagger." A hush fell over the room. Edward's face drained of color. "She wrote this to me." His voice was barely above a whisper. Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami. And now we know. Miss Harcourt did not stumble into danger by accident. She knew something important." Morton scowled. "The answer lies in the dagger," she says. "But what the hell does that mean?" Poirot's fingers brushed the edge of the letter. "It means, Inspector, that this was not a crime of passion. It was not random. It was calculated, planned." I turned back to the assembled household. Miss Harcourt knew a secret, and someone killed her to keep it buried. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the chimneys. But inside, it was the silence that spoke the loudest. Chapter 6. A Secret in Shadows. The weight of Evelyn Harcourt's letter lingered in the room like a specter, unsettling all who stood before it. The implications were clear. She had known something dangerous enough to cost her life. And yet, the cryptic final words, "The answer lies in the dagger," hung over the case like an unsolved riddle. Inspector Morton let out a heavy breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Damn it. If she knew she was in danger, why didn't she go straight to the police? Edward Harcourt, still pale, answered quietly. She must have thought she could handle it herself. His voice was thick with emotion. Or perhaps she didn't know who to trust. Poirot folded his hands neatly before him, his expression unreadable. Oui, monsieur. There is also the possibility that she was afraid of implicating someone she cared about. Fear does curious things to the mind. Lady Halewood let out a shaky breath. So this wasn't some random act. Someone in this house, wanted her dead. Julian scoffed. Let's not jump to conclusions, mother. Poirot turned his sharp gaze to Julian. Mais non, monsieur. Your mother is correct. This was not a crime of chance. Miss Harcourt came here seeking refuge. And within hours of her arrival she was silenced. Hastings, standing near the fireplace, frowned. And then there's the matter of the dagger. If she was referring to the Obsidian Dagger in her letter, then what did she mean? That the weapon itself holds some kind of clue? Morton grunted. It's a bloody murder weapon, that's all it is. Poirot pursed his lips. I am not so certain, mon cher inspector. The choice of the dagger, it is too deliberate. Why use such a unique weapon when a simpler means would suffice? The answer, I believe, lies in the significance of the dagger itself. He turned to Lord Halewood. Monseigneur, this dagger, it has been in your family for generations, oui? The old man nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes, My great-grandfather acquired it during his travels in Egypt. It has been a family heirloom ever since. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And has it always been kept in the display case in the study? Lord Halewood hesitated before replying. For as long as I can remember, yes. Then tell me, who had access to the study? Julian interjected. Anyone in the household, really. The study isn't kept locked, Lady Halewood added. The staff as well. The butler, the maids, they clean in there daily. Poirot nodded slowly. Then we must ask, who would have the opportunity to remove the dagger and use it as a weapon? Edward, his hands clenched into fists, spoke up. I want answers, Poirot. My sister is dead, and we're all standing around speculating while her murderer is still in this house. Poirot regarded him carefully. And we shall have answers, mon ami. But we must not allow grief to cloud our judgment. The truth, it is like a fragile thread. It must be unraveled with care, or it may snap. Morton turned to the butler. Davies, I want a word with the staff. Bring them in, one by one. The butler nodded and disappeared down the hall. Poirot stepped away from the others, his mind working furiously. The murder weapon, the missing hours before the crime, the letter. Each piece was part of a larger puzzle, but the image was not yet clear. A few minutes later, the first of the household staff was brought in. It was Alice, the young maid. She stood before them nervously, twisting the hem of her apron. Poirot gave her a reassuring nod. Mademoiselle, do not be afraid. We simply wish to know if you saw anything unusual last night. Alice hesitated. I didn't think much of it at the time, sir, but I did hear something. Morton leaned forward. Go on. The girl swallowed hard. I was finishing my duties before bed, and I was near the study. I heard voices, an argument. Poirot's eyes gleamed. An argument? Between whom? Alice bit her lip. I don't know. It was muffled, but it sounded tense. Julian frowned. What time was this? Around midnight, sir. Maybe a little after. Hastings exchanged a look with Poirot. That's right before Miss Harcourt was killed. Poirot's gaze never left Alice. And did you recognize any voices? Alice hesitated again before shaking her head. I wasn't sure, but there was a woman's voice and a man's. The woman sounded upset. Poirot's gaze flicked toward Lady Halewood, who had gone pale. A woman and a man, he murmured. Most intriguing. Morton turned to the maid. Why didn't you mention this before? Alice wrung her hands. I was frightened, sir, and I didn't think it was important. Morton exhaled sharply. Well, it is now. Poirot smiled at her kindly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As Alice was led away, Poirot turned back to the group. Now we know. Miss Harcourt was not alone before she was killed. She confronted someone, and whoever that person was, they had reason to silence her. Edward looked stricken. But who? Poirot glanced at the others. That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The storm outside had not abated. If anything, the wind had grown fiercer, rattling the windows of Halewood Manor like an impatient intruder. Poirot knew that the murderer was watching, waiting. But they had made a mistake. They had underestimated Hercule Poirot, and soon he would have the truth. Chapter 7. The Clock Strikes Truth. The wind howled outside, sending violent gusts against the tall windows of Halewood Manor. Inside, the air was just as tense. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of his mustache as he regarded the household with sharp, perceptive eyes. The revelation from Alice, the maid, had been an unexpected turn. The argument heard near the study, before Evelyn Harcourt's death, pointed to a confrontation, one that may have directly led to her murder. Lady Halewood had been noticeably pale ever since Alice had mentioned the presence of a woman's voice during the quarrel. Poirot did not miss the way she had clasped her hands tightly in her lap, nor the way her son, Julian, had subtly glanced in her direction. The room was full of secrets, each person guarding their own piece of the puzzle. Poirot simply had to determine which piece fit where. Inspector Morton, who had been furiously jotting notes in his leather-bound notebook, let out a huff. "So we have confirmation that someone was with Miss Harcourt shortly before her death. A woman and a man." He looked at Poirot. "What do you make of it?" Poirot's fingers twitched. "I make of it, mon cher inspector, that our murderer is feeling the walls close in," Morton scoffed. "That doesn't tell us who it is." Poirot gave him a knowing smile. "No, not yet. But we are closer, much closer." Edward Harcourt, who had remained uncharacteristically silent for the last few minutes, suddenly spoke. "It has to be Julian." His voice was low, barely above, a whisper, but the impact of his words was heavy. Julian's head snapped toward him. "What the devil are you saying?" Edward's hands clenched at his sides. "You were the last person seen with her before she was killed." Julian's face darkened. "That's absurd. I had no reason to kill Evelyn." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the argument before it could escalate. "Mademoiselle et messieurs, I beg of you, let us not fall into rash accusations. That is the work of frustration, not of logic." Julian turned to Poirot, eyes flashing. "Then what does logic say, Monsieur Poirot? Because from where I stand, you seem to be letting this madness spiral, while the real murderer sits comfortably among us." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Patience, monsieur. Logic tells us that emotions cloud judgment. Logic tells us that Miss Harcourt was afraid of something, perhaps someone. And logic tells us that she was seeking answers, but what answer did she find?" The silence in the room was deafening. Poirot let the tension settle, observing each reaction. Lady Halewood was stiff, her lips pressed together in a thin line. Julian was visibly agitated, his fingers tapping anxiously against the armrest of his chair. Edward was shaking, torn between grief and rage. Lord Halewood was unreadable, his aged face betraying nothing. Finally, Poirot spoke again. "Tell me, Lord Halewood, this dagger, the one used to kill Miss Harcourt, when was the last time you personally saw it in the study?" The old man exhaled slowly. "It was there the day before the ball. I remember because I was showing it to some guests who were admiring the artifacts in my collection." Poirot nodded. "And after that?" Lord Halewood hesitated. "I cannot say. I assumed it was still in its place." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Then someone must have taken it before the night of the murder." Morton frowned. "But who?" Poirot looked toward Hastings. "Mon ami, if you would be so kind as to fetch the dagger for me." Hastings nodded and left the room, returning a few minutes later with the weapon wrapped in a cloth. He handed it to Poirot carefully. Poirot unwrapped the dagger with delicate precision. The black obsidian gleamed under the dim light, its blade wickedly sharp. He turned it over, studying the handle. Then, quite suddenly, his lips curved into a knowing smile. "Ah," he murmured. "It is as I thought." Hastings leaned forward. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot gently tapped the base of the handle. "There is something very peculiar about this dagger, mes amis." Morton narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Poirot lifted the weapon slightly so they could all see. "Observe, if you will, the craftsmanship. The handle is designed to be gripped firmly, and yet—" He turned the dagger over. "There is a slight indentation here, barely noticeable." Edward, frustrated, exhaled sharply. "What does that have to do with anything?" Poirot's smile deepened. "Everything, mon ami." He set the dagger down and looked around the room, his gaze landing on each suspect in turn. "Miss Harcourt wrote that the answer lies in the dagger, and I believe she meant that quite literally." Julian scoffed. "That's ridiculous. It's just a weapon." Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur. It is more than that. You see, many ancient artifacts are not merely decorative. Some are crafted with hidden compartments. A secret, if you will. Morton's eyes widened. Are you saying there's something inside the dagger? Poirot picked up the weapon again, his nimble fingers pressing against the indentation on the handle. With a soft click, the base of the handle loosened. Poirot gave it a gentle twist, and to the astonishment of the entire room, a small compartment slid open. Inside, carefully folded, was a piece of paper. Gasps filled the room as Poirot extracted it with great care. He unfolded it slowly, revealing neat, slanted handwriting. His sharp eyes skimmed the words before he spoke, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Mes amis," Poirot announced, "this is what Miss Harcourt was looking for. And this," he lifted the note slightly, "is what got her killed." The room erupted into chaos. Edward was on his feet, demanding to know what it said. Julian paled. Lady Halewood clutched the edge of the chair as if steeling herself. Morton, ever the professional, raised a hand. "Let's have it, Poirot. What does it say?" Poirot looked up, his expression unreadable. "Patience, mon cher inspector. We shall read it together. But I suspect that what is written here will reveal a truth that someone in this room has been desperately trying to keep buried." The fire crackled behind him, casting flickering shadows across the faces of those gathered. Someone in that room already knew what the letter contained. Someone was watching, waiting, heart pounding with fear, and Poirot, with his impeccable composure, had never been more certain that the final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. Chapter 8. The Words of the Dead, the letter in Poirot's hand felt heavier than mere paper, as though the weight of Evelyn Harcourt's final discovery pressed upon it. The firelight flickered over the assembled suspects, their faces shifting between anxiety and forced composure. Julian Halewood stood rigid, arms folded across his chest. Edward Harcourt, still pale from the revelation, had clenched his fists, as if bracing himself for a blow. Lady Halewood's already frail composure seemed on the verge of breaking, while Lord Halewood sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Poirot unfolded the note with deliberate precision. His fingers smoothed the paper before his gaze lifted, sweeping over the room. "What we have here, mes amis, is a voice from beyond the grave. Miss Evelyn Harcourt, before her untimely death, sought the truth, and she found it." "Inspector." Morton, standing by the hearth, gestured impatiently. "Out with it, Poirot. What does it say?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "A moment, mon cher. It is not merely the words that matter, but their implications. And, as you shall see, they are most damning indeed." His voice was calm, but beneath the surface lay an undeniable tension. With a measured breath, Poirot read aloud, "I have found the proof at last. It was never an accident. The truth has been hidden in plain sight, but now I know. I will confront them. They must answer for what they have done." A hush fell over the room. The wind outside battered the windows, but within the drawing room, not a soul stirred. Poirot let the words settle before folding the note and placing it on the table. Hastings, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Good heavens, Poirot. She was planning to confront someone that night." "Just so, mon ami," Poirot confirmed. "Miss Harcourt believed she had uncovered a terrible secret, one worth killing." "4." Julian shook his head, his expression dark. "But she doesn't name anyone. That letter could mean anything." Poirot's gaze fixed on him, unblinking. "Could it, monsieur? Or does it mean exactly what it appears to mean?" Miss Harcourt had spent weeks researching a matter she believed was of great importance, and I suspect she had been threatened for doing so. Edward Harcourt's voice was hoarse when he spoke. "You mean someone knew she was getting close?" Poirot inclined his head. "C'est possible. Or perhaps she confronted the wrong person. The guilty party may have acted in desperation, believing their secret was about to be exposed. Lady Halewood let out a sharp breath. And just what secret? Do you believe this is, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot regarded her carefully. A secret that has been buried for quite some time, madame. A secret that Miss Harcourt sought to unearth, though she did not live to see the full truth revealed. Morton tapped the arm of his chair. You keep talking in circles, Poirot. What truth? Poirot's gaze flickered toward Lord Halewood, then back to the others. The dagger, mes amis, was the key. Not merely a weapon of murder, but a vessel of hidden knowledge. The message within it was concealed deliberately, and if one were to consider why it was hidden, his voice trailed off meaningfully. Edward stepped forward. But who would have hidden it? An excellent question, Poirot murmured. One might suppose the person who had the most to lose if it were discovered. A beat of silence passed, and then Lady Halewood stood abruptly. Her breathing was shallow, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair as though it alone kept her upright. This is madness. You're spinning a tale out of shadows. Poirot did not take his eyes off her. Am I, madame? His tone was mild, but his meaning was sharp. Julian's voice was low and dangerous. You don't think... He turned to his mother. Her lips parted as if she wished to deny it, but no words came. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space where her answer should have been. Poirot watched her with a kind of detached sympathy. You knew, did you not? Lady Halewood's fingers tightened. I don't know what you mean. Oh, but you do, madame, Poirot said gently. You have known for some time. Perhaps not the full extent of it, but enough. She turned away, staring into the fire. What are you saying, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot sighed. That the answer Miss Harcourt found was connected to an event long buried, and that someone in this house, someone close, was willing to kill to keep it buried. Morton stepped forward, his voice edged with frustration. Then for God's sake, Poirot, tell us who. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin, as though considering. But he had already decided. His sharp eyes moved slowly over the assembled group, pausing on each face. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, The one who has been hiding the truth all along. A collective breath was held. The moment stretched, the final threads of the mystery tightening into place. The truth was on the verge of being revealed. Chapter 9. The Threads of Deception. The silence in the drawing room was thick with tension. Every eye in the room was fixed on Poirot, waiting for the final blow to land. The detective remained poised, his fingers lightly touching the armrest of his chair. The air crackled with the weight of unspoken truths. You speak of the one who has been hiding the truth all along, Julian Halewood said, his voice tight. But you have not yet named them. Poirot nodded slowly. Patience, monsieur. The truth must be revealed in its proper order. Miss Evelyn Harcourt believed she had found it, but she was silenced before she could expose it. That is the tragedy we are dealing with. Edward Harcourt took a shaky breath. But she left that letter. She must have realized the danger. Ah, Poirot said softly. But did she realize it too late? That is the question. And the answer, mon cher, is what will lead us to the killer. The fire crackled, the only sound in the heavy stillness. Poirot's gaze moved deliberately, studying the room. Let us consider what we know, mes amis. First, we have a murder committed with the Obsidian Dagger, a weapon of significance. Second, we have a victim who was on the verge of exposing something, or someone. And third, we have a gathering of individuals, each with a reason to keep certain secrets hidden. Lady Halewood's voice was barely above a whisper. What secrets? Poirot turned to her. Ones you have spent years ignoring, madame, but they do not simply vanish. They resurface at the most inconvenient times. A flicker of something passed over her face, but she did not respond. Julian folded his arms. "Enough riddles, Poirot. Say what you mean." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Very well. Let us return to the night of the murder. Miss Harcourt was seen heading toward the study. Who among us had reason to stop her?" Lord Hailwood, who had been silent for much of the conversation, shifted slightly in his chair. His lined face remained unreadable. Poirot did not press him just yet. Instead, he continued, "We know that Miss Harcourt was investigating something linked to this house. Something old, something that ties back to the dagger. And we know that she confronted someone that night. The question, of course, is who?" Morton cleared his throat. "If you've worked it out, Poirot, now would be the time to say it." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course. It was you, Lord Hailwood." A stunned silence followed. The old man did not react immediately. His fingers remained resting on the carved arms of his chair. Only after a moment did he let out a slow breath. "That is a serious accusation, Monsieur Poirot," he said finally. Poirot remained composed. "It is not an accusation, monsieur. It is a fact." Edward shook his head in disbelief. "But why? What possible reason would he have?" Poirot turned his sharp gaze to him. "Because the secret Miss Harcourt uncovered threatened to destroy everything he had spent years protecting." Lady Hailwood stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd! My husband is not a murderer." Poirot did not flinch. "I believe that Miss Harcourt was digging into matters concerning the past. Matters your husband did not wish to be disturbed." Lord Hailwood exhaled, his eyes closing briefly. "I see now," he murmured. "You truly have pieced it together." "Haven't you?" Poirot nodded. "I have." Edward looked between them, bewildered. "But what is the secret?" Poirot's voice was calm, but firm. "The dagger did not belong to the Hailwoods, not originally." Julian frowned. "What?" Poirot pressed on. "It was stolen." A murmur ran through the room. Even Morton appeared. Taken aback, Poirot continued. "Many years ago, a certain expedition took place. The dagger was taken under less than honorable circumstances, and someone involved in that expedition knew the truth." Edward paled. "Evelyn." "Précisément," Poirot said. "She was researching the dagger's origins. She must have found something that proved its history had been falsified, and that knowledge put her in grave danger." Morton narrowed his eyes at Lord Hailwood. "Are you saying he killed her to keep her quiet?" Lord Hailwood let out a weary sigh. "I did not kill her." Poirot studied him. "No. But you know who did." The old man was silent. Then, finally, his gaze shifted to his wife. Lady Hailwood stiffened. "How dare you?" Poirot's voice remained steady. "It was you, madam." A collective gasp swept through the room. Poirot did not relent. "You overheard Miss Harcourt's plans. You knew that if she exposed the dagger's true origins, it would bring disgrace upon your family. And so, you followed her to the study that night. You confronted her." Lady Hailwood's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot leaned forward. "Did she threaten to go to the authorities? To the museum?" Tears glistened in Lady Hailwood's eyes. "She wouldn't listen," she whispered. Edward stepped back as though struck. "You?" Lady Hailwood's hands trembled. "I didn't mean—" Her voice caught. "I only meant to frighten her." Poirot's expression softened slightly, but his voice was firm. But in the struggle, the dagger was used, and Miss Harcourt was silenced forever. Tears spilled over. "I had no choice." Poirot shook his head. "There is always a choice." "Madame." A heavy silence followed. Then Morton stepped forward. "Lady Hailwood, I must place you under arrest." Julian stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Edward turned away, his face shadowed with pain. Poirot watched as Lady Halewood collapsed into her chair, weeping. The case was solved. But there was no victory in the truth, only the weight of tragedy. Chapter 10. The truth in the end, the weight of silence filled the drawing room like a suffocating fog. No one moved. No one spoke. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across Lady Halewood's pale, tear-streaked face. She sat motionless, hands trembling in her lap, her usually poised demeanor shattered. Morton, standing stiffly beside the door, adjusted his cuffs. "Lady Halewood," he said, his voice measured, "do you admit to the murder of Miss Evelyn Harcourt?" Lady Halewood's lips parted, but for a long moment no words emerged. Her shoulders sagged, under an invisible weight. Her voice broke. "I never meant to. I only wanted her to stop." Edward Harcourt, standing beside the mantelpiece, looked at his mother in horror. You killed Evelyn." His voice was barely above a whisper. Lady Halewood's breath shuddered out of her. "She was going to ruin us," she said, her voice raw. "Don't you see? She was determined to expose the truth about the dagger. She wouldn't listen to reason. She didn't care what it would do to us, to your father." Lord Halewood had not spoken in several minutes. Now he exhaled heavily, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Is this true?" His voice was barely audible. His wife turned to him, something desperate in her expression. "I did it for you." A slow shake of his head. "For me?" he murmured. "No, Veronica, you did it for yourself." She flinched as though struck. Poirot, who had watched the scene unfold with quiet detachment, now spoke. His voice was gentle but firm. "You confronted Miss Harcourt in the study, did you not?" Lady Halewood nodded shakily. "Yes." "And you argued," Poirot continued. "Perhaps you tried to reason with her at first, but she was resolute." I grabbed the dagger," Lady Halewood admitted, her voice hoarse. "Just to frighten her." Her hands curled into fists. "But she tried to take it from me. There was a struggle. I didn't mean to." Her voice broke into a sob. Julian Halewood let out a sharp breath and turned away, rubbing a hand over his face. Morton, ever the professional, observed her without emotion. "The law does not distinguish between intention and outcome, Lady Halewood." She gave a broken nod, as though she had already known this. Poirot, ever meticulous, took a moment to smooth a non-existent crease in his sleeve. "And after Miss Harcourt fell, after the deed was done, what did you do?" Lady Halewood squeezed her eyes shut. "I panicked," she whispered. I wiped the dagger and placed it back in its case." Her hands twisted together. "Then I locked the study door from the inside and left through the servants' passage." Morton gave a single nod. "A clever trick. It delayed discovery for a few crucial hours." Poirot nodded in agreement. "Indeed, and it might have succeeded in deflecting suspicion had there been no one clever enough to see through the deception." Lady Halewood gave him a broken look. "I suppose that was inevitable with you here, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head in acknowledgement. Edward let out a breath and ran a hand over his face. "And all for what? To keep a stolen artifact?" His voice shook with barely concealed anger. "It was never about the dagger," Lord Halewood said suddenly, his voice thick with exhaustion. "It was about pride, about reputation." He turned to his wife with something like sorrow in his gaze. "You would have let this family collapse under its own weight rather than admit to the truth." Lady Halewood said nothing. Morton stepped forward. "Lady Halewood, I must ask you to come with me." She did not resist. She simply rose, her movements mechanical, and walked toward the door. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning to her husband. "Reginald!" He did not look at her, With a strangled breath, she turned away and followed Morton out of the room. Silence fell again. This time it felt heavier. Edward was the first to speak. "Well," he murmured, his voice devoid of emotion. "I suppose that is that." Poirot studied him carefully. "And what will you do now, monsieur?" Edward let out a humorless chuckle. "I haven't the faintest idea." He glanced toward his father. "What happens to the estate?" Lord Hailwood sighed. "That remains to be seen." He gave Poirot a tired smile. "Perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, you were right all along. The past never truly stays buried." Poirot inclined his head. "Non, monsieur, it does not." Julian, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally turned to Poirot. "And what about you, Monsieur Poirot? What will you do now that you have unraveled this mystery?" Poirot smiled faintly and straightened his cuffs. "Ah, monsieur, I shall do what I always do." His eyes twinkled. "I shall return to London. Perhaps enjoy a fine meal, and of course I shall continue to use my little grey cells." With that, he turned to retrieve his hat and cane. As he stepped toward the door, he paused. "You see, mes amis, the truth is a curious thing. It cannot be hidden forever, no matter how deeply one tries to bury it. And in the end, it will always have its moment in the light." And with that, Hercule Poirot took his leave. The case of the Obsidian Dagger finally closed. Edward Harcourt, standing beside the mantelpiece, looked at his mother in horror. You killed Evelyn." His voice was barely above a whisper. Lady Hailwood's breath shuddered out of her. "She was going to ruin us," she said, her voice raw. "Don't you see? She was determined to expose the truth about the dagger. She wouldn't listen to reason. She didn't care what it would do to us, to your father." Lord Hailwood had not spoken in several minutes. Now, he exhaled heavily, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Is this true?" His voice was barely audible. His wife turned to him, something desperate in her expression. "I did it for you." A slow shake of his head. "For me?" he murmured. "No, Veronica. You did it for yourself." She flinched as though struck. Poirot, who had watched the scene unfold with quiet detachment, now spoke. His voice was gentle but firm. "You confronted Miss Harcourt in the study, did you not?" Lady Hailwood nodded shakily. "Yes." "And you argued," Poirot continued. "Perhaps you tried to reason with her at first, but she was resolute." I grabbed the dagger," Lady Hailwood admitted, her voice hoarse, "just to frighten her." Her hands curled into fists. "But she tried to take it from me. There was a struggle. I didn't mean to." Her voice broke into a sob. Julian Hailwood let out a sharp breath and turned away, rubbing a hand over his face. Morton, ever the professional, observed her without emotion. "The law does not distinguish between intention and outcome, Lady Hailwood." She gave a broken nod, as though she had already known this. Poirot, ever meticulous, took a moment to smooth a non-existent crease in his sleeve. "And after Miss Harcourt fell, after the deed was done, what did you do?" Lady Hailwood squeezed her eyes shut. "I panicked," she whispered. I wiped the dagger and placed it back in its case." Her hands twisted together. "Then I locked the study door from the inside and left through the servants' passage." Morton gave a single nod. "A clever trick." "It delayed discovery for a few crucial hours." Poirot nodded in agreement. "Indeed, and it might have succeeded in deflecting suspicion had there been no one clever enough to see through the deception." Lady Hailwood gave him a broken look. "I suppose that was inevitable with you here, Monsieur Poirot." He inclined his head in acknowledgement. Edward let out a breath and ran a hand over his face. "And all for what? To keep a stolen artifact?" His voice shook with barely concealed anger. "It was never about the dagger," Lord Halewood said suddenly, his voice thick with exhaustion. It was about pride, about reputation. He turned to his wife with something like sorrow in his gaze. You would have let this family collapse under its own weight, rather than admit to the truth. Lady Halewood said nothing. Morton stepped forward. Lady Halewood, I must ask you to come with me. She did not resist. She simply rose, her movements mechanical, and walked toward the door. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning to her husband. Reginald. He did not look at her. With a strangled breath, she turned away and followed Morton out of the room. Silence fell again. This time, it felt heavier. Edward was the first to speak. Well, he murmured, his voice devoid of emotion. I suppose that is that. Poirot studied him carefully. And what will you do now, monsieur? Edward let out a humorless chuckle. I haven't the faintest idea. He glanced toward his father. What happens to the estate? Lord Halewood sighed. That remains to be seen. He gave Poirot a tired smile. Perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, you were right all along. The past never truly stays buried. Poirot inclined his head. Non, monsieur, it does not. Julian, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally turned to Poirot. And what about you, Monsieur Poirot? What will you do now that you have unraveled this mystery? Poirot smiled faintly and straightened his cuffs. Ah, monsieur, I shall do what I always do. His eyes twinkled. I shall return to London. Perhaps enjoy a fine meal. And, of course, I shall continue to use my little grey cells. With that, he turned to retrieve his hat and cane. As he stepped toward the door, he paused. You see, mes amis, the truth is a curious thing. It cannot be hidden forever, no matter how deeply one tries to bury it. And in the end, it will always have its moment in the light. And with that, Hercule Poirot took his leave. The case of the Obsidian Dagger finally closed.